Haha, right, now, you were probably expecting a video on either Reading Football Club, football in general, people hiding in bushes, long story if you're not familiar with who I am. To all those people who were expecting something sporty and kicking balls around a piece of grass, more for you, because this isn't one of those videos. This is something a little different for me. I'm doing a bloody review, people. I'm doing a something reviewy. I'm going to be reviewing a thing that I like, an album I've been listening to a lot recently, and with any luck, you may like it too if you're any way of a loud music inclination. So, Jacob, what are we going to be reviewing, I hear you ask? You're ready for this? This is an album by a little-known American band called The OCs. It's a Weird Exits. I hope you can see that. I hope my camera hasn't just conked out on me, because I've had to start this video again because my microphone wasn't on. So we're very lo-fi here in JSK Towers. To those of you that do not know or who are not familiar with who the OCs are, which is likely to be anyone from my Twitter, if I've posted this on a The OCs forum or given it a plug on The OCs subreddit, you're going to be saying, you know, skip all this, we know exactly who this band are. In which case you can skip ahead to the actual review. I'm going to put it down there, probably. The OCs are a pretty big deal in the garage rock, indie rock, psychedelic rock scene. Mega prolific. They put out more albums than most people have eaten hot dinners in their lives. This, I believe, is their 16th studio album, released in 2016. It's 8 tracks long. Since then, they've put out another 2 albums. One last year called Orc, which was awesome. Released like a throwback album back end of last year too, and a couple of EPs too. So there's plenty to digest with a band with a back catalogue the size of the OCs. What can I tell you about the OCs? They're a 4-piece band. Currently have 4 members. They've gone through multiple iterations through the years. They have 2 drummers at the moment, because why not? Double the drummage. Very tight, very interlocked drums. They're fronted up by a nutcase called John Dwyer. John Dwyer, who hails from a place in the States called Providence. He's the creative force, I guess, behind a lot of what the OCs have put out. He's got a very unique style of singing, which I'll get onto, and he plays lead guitar for them and absolutely shreds on guitar. One of the finest, I would say, in my purely opinionated position, one of the finest modern guitarists of recent times. All that said, let's cut the whiff-waff and move on to what this album, A Weird Exits, has to offer. So, diving straight into the track listing, on this 8-track behemoth of an album, we have the opener called Dead Man's Gun, and regular OCs listeners won't be surprised by what's on offer here. It's definitely very much in the mould of a traditional OCs track. They know how to open up an album. It's the ideal table setter for the album, both musically and lyrically. Fuzzy lead guitar from John Dwyer that serves as the chorus. Really, they don't really do choruses. The OCs, they sort of do away with the traditional verse, chorus, verse, bridge structure in favour of this a musical verse, if you like, punctuated by a guitar riff or some recurring melody. You have John Dwyer whispering in a very low, hushed tone and then escalating that up to a gruff, hoarse shout. All the guitar breakdowns on this opening track are heralded by this very King Gizzard-esque, like, woo, like that. And that's the first and last time I'm ever going to go woo on camera. I did it again there. It's very much a case of you knowing the band's arrived and a loud smorgasbord of what's to come. On to the second track, the amazingly named Ticklish Warrior. This is where the volume just gets ramped up to 11 in true Spinal Tap fashion. The main riff on this thing comes in like a rhinoceros in a china shop. It's this monstrous, thick, heavy riff that doesn't let up. John Dwyer's lyrics laid on top. He sounds like some sort of doomsday prophet. It's really abrasive on the ears, but in the best way possible. It's this real soup of noise, this track. One of the stronger tracks on the album, I would say. This is where we get into the more experimental, psychedelic side of the album on the third feature here, called Jammed Entrance. And it's an instrumental. There are plenty of beeps and boops galore. It's this Morse code-esque beeping, or if you can remember what those old dial-up internet modems used to sound like. It's like that, but very tuneful and musical, of course, because it's the OCs and they're wacky as heck. Fans of this track will also like an EP that the OCs did, which I have here, called Dead Medic. If you like Jammed Entrance, the third track off A Weird Exits, you'll also like the long jam off this EP by the OCs, or OCs, called Dead Medic, which as well, as this track is an instrumental. It's punctuated again in chorus-esque fashion by this like arpeggiated synth motif. It's infectiously groovy stuff. It's one that definitely rewards repeated listens. It's a grower. I've liked this track more since listening to it rather than less. It really does deserve those additional listens to draw out those additional details from it. It's very layered, thick. I'm a big fan of the bass line on this thing, and the whole track has some fantastically squelchy synth work on it. So definitely check this track out. It's possibly my favourite track off the album. And moving on to that, we reached the halfway point with the track called Plastic Plant. I don't know whether that's a plastic plant like a production factory plant, or a plant like one of those crappy plastic cactuses that you can buy from Wilco or something. This was one of the lead singles off this album, and it picks up where the opening two tracks left off. It has this more traditional garage rock feel and structure about it that wouldn't feel out of place on an earlier OCs album, such as, guys like Blue Peter, all these Here's One I Made Earlier moments, such as this album, Mutilated Defeated at Last, which is another album by the OCs. I believe this came out in 2015, so a year before A Weird Exits. It has a very similar feel, in my opinion, to what Plastic Plant brings to the table. You have John Dwyer again with these weird cooing, almost animalistic lyrics, and this screechy guitar piano flutter on the lead into the verses, which gives it its underlying sinister quality to it. Down deep in the mix is like this quiet panting from John Dwyer, which is really creepy as hell. Lyrically, it tackles the very now topic of people being slaves to screens and their smartphones and their laptops, similar to what you're watching on now. Oh, how very meta, me breaking the fourth wall there. The smartphones are sort of leeching away or draining at people's vitality and life force, which is cheerful. I think this is one of the album's more accessible tracks in general. Moving on to the fantastically named Gelatinous Cube at number 5 on the listing. As soon as it gets going, the track absolutely kicks off at 1,000,000 miles an hour. After this initial ominous overhead guitar drone. Plenty of shredding guitar features on this album, but this track features more shred than usual, I would say. The latter end of the track peels back to reveal this, again, really lending itself to this video format, this oohing and ahhing. It's quieter and more leering, and again it just adds an extra dimension to the track. It's not just all, you know, boys noise. These grinding guitar stabs are chucked in like really piercing, you know, like your eardrum piercing it at points. If you've got this album turned up as you should, it has the potential to cause some long-term hearing issues in the best way possible. Gelatinous Cube overall is a whirlwind of a track, and I realise I've been very glowing in my praise for this album up until now. That's because it's a fantastic album. But this next track, called Unwrap the Fiend Part 2, cryptically named, and it's more of a palate cleanser after the most raucous track on the album before it, Gelatinous Cube. It's an instrumental, similar to Jammed Entrance, and but I don't like it as much as Jammed Entrance. See some negative feedback in there. It's got this woozy dream-like following and these subtle angelic choral harmonies in the track's closing moments. So there's this gradual swell of build across the track. And I do think it's a valuable addition to the track listing, though it may be one of the more forgettable of the 8 tracks. I do think it has its place on the album because it bridges the gap between the very loud Gelatinous Cube and the very contemplative track to follow, which is Crawl Out from the Fallout, which is great fun to say. So if Ticklish Warrior was about an apocalypse in progress, this track is about the desolate aftermath of it. There's this sparse, tinkling cymbal opening, like the drawing in of gentle waves, or a rusty post-apocalyptic breeze. And it's by far and away the most atmospheric track on the album. There's this hypnotic 1, 2, 3, 3, 4 waltzing structure to the track. This feeling of waltzing is enforced by the strings that gradually come in. I believe it's a cello. I'll have to check who played cello on this album. Bear with. Let's have a look. The fantastically named, I feel like I've said fantastically named multiple times. You'll have to bear with me. Someone should be keeping a tally, or should have a jar where you put money in. It is a Greer McGettrick who plays cello on this thing. And it's awesome. There's a bloody organ on here too from Chris Woodhouse. Wow. So all these more classical stringed instruments add to this like grandiose, haunting, atmospheric feeling on this track. There's a very stately, respectful synth line also overlaid. Begins off very sleepy but turns sour once the synth goes into like this off key. These funereal voices as well enter with little fanfare over the top. It does actually sound like, the name of the track, it sounds like crawling out from nuclear fallout into this new and desolate land. There's a lyric which is particularly haunting on this track, which I love, which is, the flakes that settle on the ground are what's left of people who are no longer around, which just about captures the mood on this track, I'd like to think. If you do like this track, it's got shades of the latter section of a track of Orc, which was the follow-up to this album, called Keys to the Castle. So if you dig this, you'll dig the bit on Keys to the Castle of Orc. So there you go, there's a little recommendation. And finally, saving the best till last in my opinion on this album, we have a track that I just love called The Axis. This is in my opinion, the perfect album closer. It's the most ballady, human or humanizing track on the album. There's this repeated 4-chord structure, and it's written like an anti-love song. So John Dwyer talks about being so desperately uninterested in this nameless other party who you assume to be an ex-lover. He came out in an interview and said it was deliberately cryptic. He wants the listener to invest as much meaning in it as possible. In saying that he doesn't care, he clearly signposts that he does care, because that's what men do, because men are awful. The final guitar solo on this album is this searing, squealing, scorching, perfect thing. It conveys a sense of utter desperation. Pushing the instrument to its absolute limit, this guitar just absolutely wails. The track literally then violently falls apart with this crashing, like stabbing static. If the last 7 tracks before this were about a world outside being torn apart, this, the sound of a person's world on the inside being torn apart, is wet and dramatic as that sounds. It's an abrupt, affecting, actually, finale to what has, up to this point, been an extraordinary overall listen. And that's the album. I hope that wasn't as boring to watch or listen to as I think it may well have been. If you want me to review anything else, you know, skull dinners, films, beard grooming apparatus, then I want to do stuff like this, but I want it to be as watchable, as enjoyable as humanly possible. I do appreciate you watching this. If I've tantalised your musical taste buds enough to go out and dig this album out and listen to it, if you do listen to it, let me know what you thought of it. This has been JSK, and I'll see you in the next video. Sorry this video is so long. I'm just going to spin it out a little longer. I just wanted to say subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. It's free. For the benefit of my granddad, it is free to subscribe. And go outside. It's a lovely day, and drink some water.